Let us begin with a possibility. A moment where the bullets in the Audubon Ballroom never struck their target, where history bent not toward silence, but toward continuity. Imagine Malcolm X alive beyond February of 1965. Imagine him not as a martyr embalmed in speeches and grainy photographs, but as a living man, aging, adapting, sharpening. This is the thought experiment. What if Malcolm X lived into the 1990s? Malcolm in the late 60s would not have been the same man who sparred with Mike Wallace or preached in the Mosque No. 7 pulpit. He was already evolving in those final months, leaving the Nation of Islam, embracing Sunni Islam, broadening his worldview beyond the narrow confines of American racial struggle and toward a global fight against colonialism and capitalism. Surviving the mid-1960s, Malcolm would have stepped directly into the chaos of America's unraveling, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, the uprisings in Watts, Detroit, Newark, Chicago. He would have seen the Vietnam War escalate and end in humiliation. And unlike many civil rights leaders of the era, Malcolm would have spoken fluently in the language of empire, exposing Vietnam not as an aberration, but as a natural extension of America's hunger for domination. By the 1970s, Malcolm X would have been in his mid-40s. Picture him walking into the era of Nixon and Watergate, an America both arrogant and insecure. This is when the Black Panther Party rose and was crushed, when COINTELPRO worked overtime to suffocate radical imagination. And here is the critical point. Malcolm's survival would have altered this landscape. He was already respected internationally, already recognized in Africa and the Middle East as a legitimate statesman of the oppressed. A living Malcolm could have lent his stature to protect younger leaders. Fred Hampton in Chicago, Angela Davis on trial, Huey Newton in exile. Instead of being fragmented, Black radical politics might have had a figurehead strong enough to keep the FBI on its heels. Imagine Nixon watching not just Stokely Carmichael, but Malcolm X testifying before the world about American hypocrisy. Then come the 1980s. Reagan ascends with his sunny smile and his lethal policies, trickle-down economics, union busting, the war on drugs. The ghettos flood with crack cocaine while Wall Street drowns in champagne. Malcolm would have been in his mid-50s, his voice seasoned, his patience slim. One can almost hear him exposing the narcotics crisis, not simply as pathology within Black communities, but as a form of chemical warfare, state-enabled, profit-driven. He would have called out mass incarceration before Michelle Alexander gave it a name. And unlike Jesse Jackson, whose presidential runs were groundbreaking, but limited by the need to appeal to white liberal guilt, Malcolm would not have softened his language. He would have named Reagan for what he was. The smiling face of a ruthless empire, a Hollywood actor who sold austerity as optimism. Globally, this was also the age of liberation struggles. South Africa fought against apartheid, Palestinians fought against occupation, Central America resisted U.S. intervention. Malcolm X alive in the 1980s would have been a constant traveler, moving between Soweto, Gaza, Managua, and Harlem. He would have shaken hands with Nelson Mandela after his release in 1990, not as a photo opportunity, but as a comrade in a shared struggle. He would have been in Havana, standing beside Fidel Castro, speaking of dignity in the face of imperial pressure. His internationalism would have forced America's Black politics to remain global, not merely electoral. Now we arrive at the 1990s. Malcolm in his late 60s, an elder statesman, not a relic, but a razor. This is when Clinton comes on the scene, promising a third way that triangulated between civil rights progress and conservative backlash. Clinton's charm concealed policies that accelerated mass incarceration, that gutted welfare, that militarized police. Imagine Malcolm X on C-SPAN, dismantling Clinton's rhetoric in real time. Imagine him addressing the Congressional Black Caucus, refusing to be seduced by the trappings of access. Where many in the 1990s celebrated the rise of Black mayors, Black police chiefs, and eventually a Black president, Malcolm would have warned, representation without transformation is illusion. And there is another layer, culture. The 1990s are the golden age of hip-hop. Public Enemy, Tupac, Nas, Lauryn Hill. Much of this music already drew upon Malcolm's speeches. But with Malcolm alive, imagine the collaboration. He would have appeared on albums not as sample fragments, but as a living mentor. The youth of the 90s, watching police brutality, watching economic abandonment, would have seen Malcolm not as a textbook chapter, but as a flesh and blood elder demanding they sharpen their critique. His presence might have pulled hip-hop even further toward political clarity, away from pure commodification. So what is the consequence of this imagination? If Malcolm X lived into the 1990s, America would have been forced to face itself more honestly. The bipartisan consensus on neoliberal economics and mass incarceration would have faced an unrelenting critic who could not be bought, who could not be silenced with honorary degrees or foundation grants. Black America would have carried a more unified political consciousness into the new millennium, grounded not only in electoral strategy, but in global solidarity. And the moral vocabulary of this country would have been richer, sharper, less willing to be lulled by easy lies. But here lies the tragedy of the thought experiment. We did not get that Malcolm. We got absence. We got the void where he should have stood. We got the hip-hop sample instead of the collaboration, the poster instead of the presence. And because of that, generations have been forced to piece together fragments to reconstruct the unfinished sermon. Yet, imagining Malcolm alive into the 1990s is not just about mourning what we lost. It is about challenging what we still accept. We live in an America still addicted to prisons, still intoxicated by war, still offering cosmetic diversity in place of justice. To imagine Malcolm alive is to demand we pick up the work he never finished, to refuse the comfort of myth and embrace the discomfort of action. So the question is not merely what if Malcolm X lived into the 1990s? The question is, what will we do now that he did not? Will we content ourselves with nostalgia, or will we dare to speak with the same clarity, the same audacity, the same refusal to bow? Malcolm's survival is a dream. Our obligation is to make his unfinished struggle a reality.